so much for extending the book club's invitation to join your meeting today. I'm really honored that the club has chosen my book for this month's meeting. I just want to mention that my brother, Richard Cross, is here with me today to troubleshoot any tech issues, although I think those have been solved, and my sister as well, Kristen Karakian, is here from Boulder. And I'm very delighted to be joined by photo historian and autochrome collector Mark Jacobs of Wisconsin, graphic designer Nick Zellinger, historian Sybil Barnes, and artist Cheryl Pennington, each of whom has a connection to the Clatworthy story. Thank you so much. Those of you who are familiar with Estes Park history probably already know something about Fred Clatworthy. He was one of the first Americans to utilize the autochrome process, the first commercially viable form of color photography. He established a national reputation as a landscape photographer and crisscrossed the United States in the 1920s and 30s on what he called his lecture tours, projecting his color slides on a giant screen. His narrated travelogues drew audiences numbering in the thousands who had never seen color photographs on such a large scale before. The national parks, Rocky Mountain, Mesa Verde, Grand Canyon, Bryce Canyon, Zion Glacier, Yellowstone appeared in luminous, natural color. What perhaps most distinguished him from others using the autochrome process at that time was National Geographic's interest in his work that resulted in publishing 6 series of his autochromes. Well, no book about Clatworthy's life would be complete without an account of his cross-country bicycle trek at the turn of the century. This grand adventure, which he chronicled in letters to his parents along the way, provides a fascinating glimpse into the early Western United States and informed his later travels. Of course, Clatworthy's 65-year career is particularly relevant to the Estes Park community because it's where he operated his photography studio, curio, and gift shop featuring artifacts from his travels, and ice cream parlor on Elkhorn Avenue. He arrived in the area in 1904 and was elected the second mayor of the town in 1918. So why did I decide to write his story? In the late 1990s, I met Clatworthy's daughter, Barbara Gish, Bobby, through my sorority alumni association in Denver. Bobby and I became acquainted, and she began telling me about her father and his work. She knew I had written a few articles about our alum group, and it was apparent that she was looking for someone to write her father's story. She invited me to her home in Littleton and took me down to the basement where there were tables and tables piled with written material, photographs, and memorabilia of her father's life. It was then the thought occurred to me, this is a book waiting to be written. And because I was working full time then, I spent my free time over the next 7 years researching, writing, editing, consulting others on the manuscript, and looking for a publisher. I believed I had found one and actually had a signed contract, but due to unfortunate circumstances, the book was never published. In the intervening years, I have published another book and have speaking engagements related to that book. Enter the pandemic. Last fall, with time on my hands, as I think most of us had, I decided to explore resurrecting the Clatworthy project. I had never felt right about permanently scrapping it, primarily because of the importance of the subject and professionally because of the time and effort I had expended. So over the course of several months, I edited and updated the manuscript and was pleasantly surprised that several factors converged to render this incarnation of the book possible. Primarily the collaboration with Mark Jacobs, foremost collector of Clatworthy autochromes, was crucial to the viability of the project. There wouldn't have been a project without his autochromes. He was very much a part of the original endeavor, but this rendition of the book includes many more autochromes than originally planned. Mark lives in Wisconsin, and we have had numerous email and phone conversations. In fact, this is the first time we are meeting face to face. Mark selected images from his extensive collection that he felt might be appropriate, and we ended up with what I feel is a very good representation of Clatworthy autochromes. Well, since Clatworthy's most notable photographic achievement was his commercial success using autochromes, it was mandatory that they be included, and that meant printing in color. Fortunately, the cost of color printing has become less expensive over the years. My search for a graphic designer began with a call to the printer of my previous book and resulted in a referral to Nick Zellinger, a seasoned graphic designer who lived in Lakewood for many years, and before he relocated to, coincidentally, Estes Park. I found him to be highly competent, professional, and responsive in designing the book cover and interior, which involved the placement of numerous photographs. I would highly recommend his company, NZ Graphics, to anyone who's looking for a graphic designer. Nice to finally meet Nick in person. There's your plug, Nick.
Thank you.
Another fortuitous encounter was with Sybil Barnes. When I first wrote the book, someone referred me to her as a good person to consult on the manuscript, and she was very helpful. She worked at the Estes Valley Library at the time. When I decided to re-explore publishing the book, she was supportive and played an important role in my decision to go ahead. Thank you, Sybil. I'm grateful for her historical perspective as well as for her endorsement, which appears on the back of the book. The endorsement by John Fielder came about at the time of the original writing through my association with his editor, whom I knew through the Denver Women's Press Club. Since Clatworthy and Fielder share a reputation as pioneering nature photographers, it seemed like a good fit. I met Carrie Stavanis, owner of the Cabintique shop in Estes, when she was working at the Good Samaritan facility in Estes Park, where Bobby Gish had relocated and spent her remaining days. Carrie knew Bobby well, and I have appreciated her insights and confidence in this work. I also value my contact with Cheryl Pennington, who was a dear friend of Bobby and is well known for her work colorizing many of Clatworthy's black and white photos. Lastly, my brother Richard Cross's connection to this community has proved invaluable. He has some interesting anecdotes to relate about this project, and I would like for him to share those. I'm also looking forward to hearing from the others I have mentioned and from any of you who have experiences or questions related to the Clatworthy saga. This concludes my introductory remarks.
Thank you so much, Richelle. Does anybody have any questions for Richelle, or maybe any of those members involved in the printing of this book right off the bat?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. I just like for Mark Jacobs to talk a little bit about his collection and how he's got interested in Clatworthy, what else he's interested in, a little bit about that.
Okay. I was a collector of photographs, print photographs and daguerreotypes, starting in around 1968 or so. At some point, someone showed me an autochrome that was in a viewer called a diascope. This was around 1972, 73, around that period. And I was struck by that I'd never heard of this process. Again, this is early. This is about 1972 or so. The more I started to research autochromes, the more I discovered that there was really not much material in English, at any rate, available about the process. There was some material about it in French, but not much in English. At some point, I realized that a number of autochromes were published in the National Geographic magazine. which had been overlooked, and it's still overlooked by a lot of photo historians. And there's reasons for that. Some of it has to do with just plain outright snobbery, in that there's a division between art photography and commercial photography, and photo historians tend to thumb their nose down at what they perceive to be commercial photography in favor of the art photography. Anyway, I came upon Clatworthy's autochromes in the National Geographic, so I knew about them probably around 1974. You know, I was pretty well familiar with his published work at any rate. Around 1976, I think, a friend of mine had a friend who visited Estes Park, saw the Clatworthy name on the home, went up to the residence, talked to Helen Clatworthy at that point. Helen didn't own the autochromes. Fred Jr. actually owned the autochromes at that point. Anyway, one thing led to another. And at that point, I made arrangements to buy around, I forget if it was 450 or 500 autochromes. And that's what I did. I had to borrow money to do it. At the time, I was still pretty young. I was still in my 20s at that point. Borrowed the money, got the autochromes, and started researching his work, and not just Clatworthy. I mean, my collection includes other autochromes besides Clatworthy, but the heart of the collection are the 500 or so autochromes that make up the Clatworthy collection. So, I don't. Any questions there?
Well, I think that you have come to Estes Park and given some presentations, and
I was invited to the Estes Park Museum by the Estes Park Museum a couple of years ago, and gave a presentation there. Interestingly, Clatworthy is better known for his autochromes in Europe than he is in the U.S. And that's strictly the result of having there's more interest in the history of color photography in Europe than there is in the U.S. And again, there's reasons for that, which I won't bore you about, but there's been a number of exhibitions of Clatworthy's autochromes in Europe. There's been 3 of them in the Czech Republic, including at the embassy of the American embassy in the Czech Republic. They sponsored several of the exhibitions. In Prague, there was an exhibition that included his autochromes in France and in Germany, and there's a number of books that have published his autochromes. He's not unknown in Europe.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for sharing that with us. So I've got a couple of kind of discussion questions about the book. If we want to dive in, or does anybody have any kind of just general questions about the project or the book or anything like that for Richelle before we jump in?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
Michaela, can you hear me? Richard here.
Oh,
I
hi,
just want to share my anecdote when it's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just a few minutes. I don't know if we want to do it now or.
Yeah, let's do it now.
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Richard Cross. I'm Richelle's brother. I'm here at her house to help her with technical issues. but I'm having my own technical issues. So I'm actually using our other sister is here too, Kristen Karakian. So I'm broadcasting from her iPad. Anyway, to tell the story, I've had my house in Estes Park for since 2020 or since the year 2000. So have lived in the house part-time since then. Always been interested in Estes Park history. And when Richelle started bringing, Bobby around, I remembered that when I was in college, I had bought this book at my college library, had a used books sale. And I was at the time wanted to fill my bookshelves up. So I bought this volume. It's the National Geographic's for the first half of the year 1928. So I bought this book in the mid to late 70s, and it's been on my was on my shelf for like 25 years. And then just by pure coincidence, when Richelle had, said, told me about Bobby, I had pulled this down and said, oh, National Geographic. I opened it up, and in the June issue of the 1928 National Geographic, there's an article, like a 20-page article by Payne Clatworthy. And it has, so if you are a National Geographic subscriber and are interested, you can go online and look at the archives and see this article from the June issue, June 1928, article by Payne Clatworthy. It has like 20 of his autochromes, I'm sure, which Mark has the originals too. So anyway, Richelle brought Bobby to my house. We were going to go out to lunch, and I was showing this to Bobby and leafing through the photos. You probably can't see them too well, but they're gorgeous photos. Let me pull the right one up here. There's this photo of mountains in the background and like a poppy field, yellow poppies. And there's a little girl in the field picking flowers. And Bobby said, oh, that's me.
Right.
From 1928. So it's when she was a little girl. Her father always said, I think Richelle mentions in the book, that her father always liked to have people in his pictures. So he had his daughter along and took her picture, and it went into National Geographic. And then Bobby told me about it when she came to my house. So I thought that was really delightful.
I once asked Bobby what it was like growing up to have her picture in the National Geographic. To me, it would be, gee, gosh, the National Geographic. But her answer was, it was normal for her. She didn't think anything of it because that's what her father did. So she took it in stride. It was just part of growing up. A number of the pictures in National Geographic actually, at least a few of them, include Bobby and Helen. There's one or two of Fred Jr., but mostly Helen and Bobby. The people in the National Geographic images were important because they needed scale. And that's why those people are in there. It provides a scale. If you see a picture of a landscape, we're not talking about Ansel Adams, we're talking about, something that had a much, even a wider circulation than Ansel Adams images ever received. So, they needed, the idea of scale and human interest. And that, that's what the people provided. Also the color. Clatworthy made a number of autochromes which are much more subtle. than what you would see in the National Geographic, but they're not super colorful, and those tended not to get published. I mean, he did a number of really interesting autochromes in the Southwest of shadows on buildings, but you know, they're not, they don't hit you over the head. So they were never published in the magazine. The 1928 issue is interesting because between 1923, when his first, I think it was 1923, when his first series was published, and in 1928, he didn't send anything to National Geographic because he was mad. It was basically that. He felt that National Geographic didn't treat him fairly, and he was kind of right about that. The first series, they paid him a grand total of $10 per image, you know, which of course didn't cover anything. But more importantly for Clatworthy is they kept the images too long. Clatworthy's income from the autochromes, believe it or not, didn't come from the National Geographic. It came from the slide lectures. That's where he recovered his costs for these autochromes, because it was a very, very expensive undertaking, you know, to do these things in color. It was far more expensive to make autochromes than it was to make black and white imagery. So it was the slide lectures that paid for it. And National Geographic really kept them on the hook by not returning the autochromes on time, by saying that they would use them and then not using them, sending them back to him, which he feared would cause breakage. So he just refused to have much to do with National Geographic in that aspect of the endeavor. He liked National Geographic in terms of his slide lectures. That was an important part for him, as Richelle noted that some of these slide lectures, particularly the early ones at National Geographic, had over 3,000 people there to see it. And National Geographic was connected to the Cosmos Club, which was an explorers club. So it was an important contact for him, but it was more important for the slide lectures than for the pictures in the magazine, at least later on, you know.
Thanks, Mark. David, I see you have your hand up. Did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I had a question. Is autochrome just a different name for color pictures, or is it a different process?
Oh, it's a different process. The autochromes are on glass to begin with. So the undertaking of the autochrome was kind of a throwback to earlier periods in photography, in the photographic history, you know, when glass plates were being used. Excuse me, let me get a glass of water here. So lugging around these 5x7 inch glass plates were heavy. And like I said, it was a throwback. You know, film, of course, was available by the time Clatworthy was photographing. But, you know, autochromes are glass. They're glass positive, it's glass transparency. It's what we call an additive color process. It's not a subtractive color process that, you know, most color prints that you would look at today are made by subtractive color. This is an additive color, which is based on the three primary colors. So it's a totally different type of color process than you know, what eventually replaced it Kodachrome. But it had a long life. I mean, the autochromes were partially introduced in France in 1907. And they continued, more or less until about 1932, 1931, when the autochrome, instead of being on glass, a glass support, became available on a film support. But by then there were other processes that were competing with it, most notably Dufay color. And National Geographic was slowly trying out other processes, beside the autochrome. And then when Kodachrome came on the market in the late 1930s, then that's when the switch was made from autochromes to Kodachrome, pretty much. And Clatworthy went with that too. Clatworthy made a number of Kodachromes later on.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any other questions about just kind of generally photography for the book? All right, well, I have my first discussion question for you all. Richelle mentioned this a little bit about Clatworthy's bicycle trip kind of across America, really. What do you think it was about the American West that captivated him so? Not everybody at once. Nick.
Well, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Well, I'll just jump in real quickly. I mean, at that point, the allure, bicycles became a very major mode of transportation, affordable. And it still astounds me that he, like many others, would get on a bike and go east to west. Actually traverse the continent on a bicycle. Not only just him on a bicycle, but him in a pack of supplies on a bicycle. That's a story unto itself. But I think it's the mode of transportation made it possible for people to do that. Kind of like, it's equivalent of a motorcycle. It's like I want to go west. I want to be a pioneer. Maybe I don't want to be on a covered wagon, but I want to be out in the elements, and I want to have the freedom to go where I want to go without purchasing a train ticket. So I think that's probably the immediate allure of somebody like Fred going out and having that adventure, which is still astounding to me.
I think it was, oh, I'm sorry. Cheryl, speak.
Oh, Bobby used to tell me a lot of stories about that trip, about her dad, and show me special things she had about that. And I got to know her so well because my partner, Kay Cody, was the designer and the architect that redid the old Clatworthy house. And so they had a lot of, when I first went in, it was like stepping into a historical zone. It was unbelievable to me. I just couldn't believe it. But then how I got acquainted with them, there was a huge box of old glass plate negatives in the corner. And I had been hand coloring my own pictures for about 4 years. And I thought it was fun. And I said, but they were going to get rid of them because they'd given every one that they thought was of value to the Denver Museum, and the rest of this stuff was just seconds. And so I asked them if they'd like me, do they knew what they were? And they said, well, not really. So they had me scan each glass plate, put it in a sleeve, and it took me all winter, probably did 400 of them. And so they had a record. They could see what, understand what I'm saying each image was. And so after that happened, they were going to pay me. And they said they just couldn't afford to pay me. But since I like to hand color, they would like to have these images out in the public again. What if they just gave me permission to hand color any of these pictures that I had scanned for them? So I thought that was a much better deal than getting paid. And it started on like a 20-year friendship with Bobby. We went out every Wednesday and went to the grocery store and went to lunch. And then any picture that I had hand colored, I would bring and give her a copy in black and white and color. And we'd go find where her dad took that picture. So she would take me like up to where the Lone Pine was. The Lone Pine, there used to be a curio shop or a shop up there by it. And I did this one of her dad's pictures of a swing with the man in it and pulling a rope to make the swing work. And she said, oh, my dad built that for me. So we went up to above their house. And I'm sorry about this phone, just a minute. My little nephew has COVID and they're gonna call me. There, that's done. My little nephew has COVID, so they're gonna call me when he gets back from the doctor. So that's why I have it on. Anyway, that's how I got to know Bobby, and she took me up and we could see all the old hardware for the swing. And oh, we were so excited. And when we were there, it was amazing. There was a little bear cub sleeping up there. So I took a picture of it, and that Bobby used that as part of her Christmas deal that year. We just got to be great friends. My mom and dad had passed away, as well as my sister. I had no immediate family, and she just kind of became like my family. And we went out, once a week for all that time. And we did an art show at Good Sam of the hand colored picture, and then her dad's picture in black and white, because I had a dark room back then. I was using the dark room, not. And then I remember meeting you, Mark, one time I met you at Molly B's up there, and we had a great evening. It's good to see Sybil and Michaela and all these people I know, and share my stories of Bobby, because they made me a better person. And everybody said, well, what's the main thing you learned from her? And I said, okay, how to grow old gracefully. She was just a champion. She was a wonderful, wonderful human being. And it really enriched my life to know her. And it wasn't like making money on all these pictures. I go to thrift stores and buy the frames and refinish them. And Scott Boyott trades me pictures for cutting old glass and, all the things that we've done to keep them reasonable. It was about sharing her dad's pictures. And he used to pay women in Estes Park 35 cents a picture to hand color the images. And this was before the autochrome was there. He was doing the autochrome. So that's how they got the color. So anyway, I had a lot of fun doing it. And I am so happy that Richelle wrote this book. It is awesome. I just enjoyed reading it, and it brought so much back to me. And thank you, Richelle. It's a very good book.
Thank you, Cheryl.
You're welcome.
Cheryl mentioned walking into the Clatworthy home before the remodeling. I had a similar experience. This was back in around, I think the first time I was there was around 1980, maybe 1979.
Well, that was
Okay.
before I was.
Pardon?
That was way before I was.
Yeah. And Helen Clatworthy was still living then, and she lived in the house alone. And Fred was going to come up from Arizona, Fred Jr. And he did come up. I'd met him then, first time I met him. But walking into the Clatworthy home at that point was, I don't know how you could explain it, but nothing had changed basically since Fred Clatworthy died. I mean, basically the house was intact and nothing had changed. Helen didn't change anything. Nothing had moved. It was like a time capsule. Everything basically was where it was. I've seen pictures of the Clatworthy home. I have some negatives of it from the 1930s, and it was essentially exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it was. And it was that way. It was probably 2000 when Bobby took me over in there. And right after she'd moved up here, I met her. And her dad's boots were sitting there.
Yeah.
on the floor and his glasses on the table. And there was a book of guests that came, and it was Stanley, not Fred Stanley, it's Fred Clatworthy, but Stanley's name was in there, and all these historical people. And I was just like, wow. And they had me help clean out Fred's dark room and business office that was next door. And I said, no, I'm not going to do anything in here. This stuff needs to be handled by somebody that's just not a former PE teacher gone in color. This needs to be handled by people that know what they're doing.
Right.
And so Kay and Bobby and her daughter got most of that stuff taken care of by the proper people. But it was just amazing to me and the cave room. Remember the cave room?
Oh, yeah. The so-called Indian cave room.
It was built right into the mountain, you guys, and it had a adobe fireplace that heated the whole. Oh, it's just amazing. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't even
Well,
believe
that's still there.
Yeah.
He would keep some of his autochromes in there because it was more or less fireproof.
Right.
Than the rest of the house. Clatworthy did. I mean, later on, I guess some of you know this, that he did build a building. He built the first fireproof building in Estes Park.
Right.
It's still there. I mean, I understand it was turned into a coffee shop a couple of years ago. I mean, Cheryl, you might know that. But it's behind where the original Clatworthy E Little shop is. If you walk around in the back, it was a fireproof building, and he had a setup where the door was on a rope, and if the fire came, the fire would burn the rope, and the door would shut. And that's how he would protect it.
I think Sybil has some knowledge of that, and also of the property that the Clatworthys used to own.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say the Clatworthy shop was the Frumis gift store, Pioneer gift shop when I was growing up. For being a semi-former historian and librarian, I don't have good grasp on my dates, but talking about the cave room, when I was a small child, probably in like the late 50s, we used to go and visit Helen, my father and I, and it was like magic land to me. Helen always, there's pictures of her in her Indian regalia, and usually in the rooftop rodeo parade, she was dressed up in, some authentic elk skin dress. And she had long gray hair that she had braided. I really thought she was an Indian for the first half of my life. But it was just a magical thing. And I think somebody was saying too, maybe you, about or that Bobby said, when you grow up like that, when, your father's a photographer or your father's the president or whatever, you don't think that's any different. And that's what I loved about going to see the Clatworthys and their just visiting with those people that had that link to the past. I think sometimes that's one of the reasons that I was interested in history, because I knew some of those older people who had lived that time and still lived like that, like Mark was saying, that, or Cheryl even, that in 2000, their house looked like it did in 1930. So that's all I really wanted to say about that.
I think that Kay has done a marvelous job of retaining the original character of the house, and it is somewhat like a museum. Now, that was one of the things that most surprised me, Michaela, when I was writing this book, was to see the house as it is today. It's absolutely stunning. And
well, that was really, really important to Kay, to keep the integrity, and it was on the historic places. And Kay's during her career, she did a lot of historic things, and that was her main concern.
oh,
And they wanted to put they didn't have an entrance to the girls' bedrooms. They wanted to put the stairs in there and go down and, you know, and open things up. But they opened it up in such a way it still felt like you were stepping back in time, which I thought was a tribute to all of them because they all worked on it together, and it's amazing. They ran it out now, but to tourists and stuff. But what an opportunity for somebody to get to stay there.
Was Kay instrumental in obtaining the National Register of Historic Places designation and the Colorado Register?
So Bobby did all that.
Okay, yeah.
But
May I come in?
That her additions or the new porch on the front or everything that she did, she wanted to make very sure that it would be accepted, and it was just made more new. It wasn't made more different, if you understand what I'm trying to say. It kept the integrity of the cave room and the everything. I thought she did a great job. I had never been over there and met him till after a lot of it was done. I just saw it that one time, but it was still like stepping back in history. It kind of gave you the
Museum.
I don't know how unimportant we are as individuals in the scheme of things. It was like going back into a different life and experiencing part of what you guys wouldn't know what I mean.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll be quiet now.
Yeah, no, I get what you mean, Cheryl, for sure. Susan, did you have something?
But yeah, I just wanted to join in. I wrote the nomination for the National Registry of Historic Places. Barb asked me to. And I just wanted to mention that I had a heck of a time with the people in Denver about how important this building was. And they kept saying, no, it's only important locally. And I fought and fought and fought. But then when it came back from Washington, he said, no, Clatworthy is a nationally important figure, and that site is also nationally important. So yay.
I'll show you that book that you did.
Yeah.
It was awesome the way you did it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I know I've worked on a couple of register kind of nominations, I guess, and they are big projects, and you have to jump through all the hoops and make sure all your ducks are in a row. And yeah, those are huge projects. So congratulations, Susan. It's very exciting. Lynn, I saw your hand up earlier. Did you have anything to add? Oh, you're muted. Still muted. That's all right. Bottom left corner.
There's a little red thing. That's what
There we go. I'm
There you
so
go.
sorry.
There you go.
Cheryl, I wanted to ask you, do you hand color note cards for folks, or a picture that you've done for them and transform them to note cards?
Yeah.
I think I have one of yours that a friend sent to me of her own personal home. And I was so impressed. And I don't have it right here in front of me to look, but I'm sure it must be one of yours. It's just beautiful.
Well, thank you. It's just fun to do. And I just loved that class. I'd had a dark room for 20 years and I just write
Yes.
on black and white, but I just thought it was so fun. And then getting to know Bobby, and oh my God, she was so excited.
Oh, it's beautiful. It reminds me of some of my grandmother's old photographs that were hand colored, and
My mom's
just
high school.
yeah, just a beautiful way of doing it. And I wanted to say to Richelle how much I enjoyed this book.
Oh,
It's just so well done and so much fun to read. So thank you, you guys.
thank you.
All right, guys, I have a couple more discussion questions to kind of keep us moving. This has been a great conversation so far. Usually by this time I've gone through half of my questions, and I think I've asked two. So kind of to Susan's point, actually, what do you think Fred Clatworthy's kind of influence or what's the word I want? Contribution, I guess, was to Estes Park in particular. We've talked about his kind of national lecture series and how well known he was in Europe and kind of beyond. What do you think his contribution to Estes Park specifically was?
I have an opinion on that.
Richelle.
Surprise, surprise. Well, I think he is very much responsible for the economic development of Estes Park in that he drew thousands of tourists to the town through his lecture tours and images in National Geographic. And he was one of the town's first entrepreneurs. He had the stage stop. He had branch stores in Moraine Park and Stanley Hotel. He had the first telephone exchange, first Eastern Kodak agency in Colorado, one of the first. He did chronicle the history of the town through his photographs too. And a lot of his early black and whites are sought after by collectors. And I think probably Sybil could speak to that as well, maybe his legacy in the town.
Oh, sure. I think, the fact that he was the second mayor, the first mayor was a realtor, the Bond, who Bond Park is named after. And so that business, that idea of tourism and taking a picture home of where you had been is such a big part of Estes Park history. All the things that Richelle said and all the things that she put in the book about that. And now we still continue with that. There are so many people now, Eric Stensland and James Frank, Moses Swindler, people who came here because it is so beautiful here and they want to share that beauty with other people. And I think Fred Jr. was a big part of the development of Estes Park too. He was, in the Chamber of Commerce, really tried to, so a lot of what is controversial in town now is about how all the tourists come and take over our wonderful little mountain village. But the town was built on tourism, and people like Fred Clatworthy are the building blocks of that, which is why it's so important for the museum and history to continue about that. I was also wondering, I think that you can probably look up all those nominations for the register, right? For the National Register and for the State Historic Register. There are places where you can look that up and read it and see how much work Susan put into it.
Oh, it's amazing. I saw it. It's amazing how much work you put in that.
And the only other thing that's not Estes Park related is History Colorado, which used to be the Colorado State Historical Museum, has, I think, the largest collection, probably other than Marc Jacobs, of Clatworthy's work. And so if you're ever just wandering around in Denver, you should stop in there and ask to look at some of the things that they have, which are fabulous.
Doesn't the Smithsonian have a lot of Clatworthy autochromes, Mark? The Smithsonian?
Well, yeah, Bobby used to say that, but I've never really been able to find anything from the Smithsonian that are definitely Clatworthy's. As far as the Colorado History Colorado, that was kind of an interesting development in terms of getting him there. What happened is after Fred died, Fred Sr., the autochromes were then inherited by Fred Jr., and he owned the autochromes. The reason they ended up with me, I mean, outside of the fact that I paid for it, was I wanted to keep them together as much as possible. These things tend to get split up, and the more valuable ones get sold off, and not every autochrome is marked, by Fred Payne Clatworthy. So, they are on glass, they are fragile. and they tend to lose their maker over the years. So there's a number of anonymous autochromes that float out there that nobody really knows who did. You can make an attribution thinking, well, it's probably this person, but it's not the same as knowing for certain, that it's this person or that person. So it was very important that I keep as many of the autochromes together as I could. The remaining autochromes that I didn't get, were left at the house. Over the years, Fred tried to get me to buy them, but I couldn't afford them. I'm still paying for the first group. But I did mention at that point that the Colorado Historical Museum would be a good place to put them, because I didn't want them on the market. It was, I was worried that, again, if, there were a lot of autochromes. A number of these autochromes that were still at the house were not in very good shape. These were, a lot of them were seconds or thirds. But Clatworthy made more than one exposure of an image. He would what we call bracket his exposures. Some of these autochromes actually I found in the rafters up in the old studio. He just threw them up there. So they weren't protected. They had no cover glass. Some of them were peeling. A number of them are peeling actually. So there's a number of really super autochromes that are at the Colorado Historical Museum, but a number of them also required some tender loving care and restoration, conservation, really.
Yeah.
And eventually what happened was Barbara started working at the museum. So eventually she inherited the autochromes after Fred Jr. died. And after he passed away, then she was able to donate the remainder of these autochromes to the Colorado Historical Museum, History Colorado, or Colorado History, I guess. History Colorado, I guess it is. It's a silly name for a museum, frankly, but there, I mean, I don't want to take up too much time, but there they sat, unfortunately, for the better part of 30 years, and nothing happened with them. Absolutely nothing happened with them. And they were busy with other things. They had no money, to digitalize them or even to photograph them before that point. They did nothing with them. And it was only recently, in the last several years, that they got a grant to digitalize 200 of them. So I was involved in that project. Actually, I gave them all the technical details on how I digitalized them, which is not to say that's the perfect method, but it was a decent method. So they used that. Adrienne Evans was on a part-time grant to do that. So she did that over the course of about a year or so. And interestingly enough, Adrienne Evans left the Colorado Historical Museum, and she's now here in Madison. So if you go online, they have about 200 autochromes online now. So that was all part of this grant. But they have many more autochromes there that could have been digitalized that are still waiting.
Yeah, I looked the other day, and if anyone is interested in like kind of researching his work further and things like that. They do have a finding aid as well listed as well on their website. So it tells you kind of what they hold in their collection.
Yep.
Even if you can't see it over the website, there is a list of things that they do have in the Clatworthy collection that they have there at History Colorado. So that can be found online as well. Yeah, Richard.
Okay, I have one more piece of show and tell just as we're here. Another thing that Clatworthy was involved in was panoramas of the Estes Park downtown area mainly. The museum itself has many panoramas, so, many of which I think are actually Clatworthy's, taken by Clatworthy. But anyway, I said Richelle had brought Bobby to my house, and on my wall, I had this frame. I bought this on the internet from eBay or somewhere, yeah, it must have been eBay. A big panorama. It was framed. I don't know if you can see it very well. You can still actually go and buy this. It's on file at the Library of Congress. But I had it on my wall, and you probably can't see it, but here on the very far left side of the picture, there's a man and a woman standing. This is over the town of Estes, over the downtown area. It's actually probably from his property, from Clatworthy's property. So there's a man and a woman standing there, barely distinguishable. But Bobby saw that and said, "Oh, that's Dad." In the picture, she said, "Oh, they're the woman." She didn't know who the woman was, but we said, "Oh, that's Dad." So that was another piece of history, that happened right there in my house.
You've had excellent timing with these things.
Anyway, just thought I'd share that because I thought that was delightful too.
Yeah.
To have her identify that. You look at it, my picture is much bigger. You can see, oh, well, yeah, I guess that does look like him. But she identified him immediately.
That's fantastic. Yeah, you've had excellent luck at your house. All right, guys, I have a couple more discussion questions for us, and then we'll wrap things up here. So again, Richelle, you mentioned this in your book a little bit. What do you think the connection is, I guess, between photography, including Mr. Clatworthy, and the birth of the American National Park System? You went into that a little bit, but do you guys think there's a connection? Is there a connection? What were your thoughts on reading that section of the book?
Well, I definitely think there's a connection. I mean, that's how 90% of the people could see what was there to know if they wanted to make it a national park. My grandparents came out here, way back when, and that's where I first heard of Clatworthy, really, before Kay did the house, was because my grandma collected everything you could collect, and she collected Clatworthy photographs. And they started collecting them out here. So I have a book of Clatworthy photographs, and people have given me a lot of them. They have, because they know that it started with my grandma way back when. But that's how they wanted to, that's how they and their relatives all wanted to have a national park, because it's so beautiful, and they could share the beauty with the postcards they took home to show their friends. Anyway, that's just a little bit of my opinion.
One interesting tidbit is the first series in color, the first actual series in color in the National Geographic was called America, Land of the Best. And it was done to establish the national park system. And this was not Clatworthy, this was another photographer, Franklin Price Knott. But that was the actual first series in the National Geographic of autochromes. And again, it was a coordinated effort to establish the national park system. The second full series, the first series that Clatworthy did was also called America, Land of the Best, something like that. And it was a continuation of that. The National Park System was established, but Clatworthy's autochromes of the National Park System, of the National Park, as Cheryl mentioned, were the first time that most people saw the national parks in color. So, you can't, it's hard to overestimate the importance of Clatworthy's autochromes on the development of the national park. Also, in terms of Estes Park and Rocky Mountain National Park, Clatworthy, along with another photographer, Frank Briley, and Mills, went to Congress, and I think this was in 1917, with the whole intent to show the autochromes that Clatworthy had taken by 1917. That was just a few years after he learned the process, to establish or to enlarge Rocky Mountain National Park. The bill to get Congress to make Rocky Mountain National Park larger was stalled in Congress. He showed these autochromes, and within a week or two, the enlargement of the Rocky Mountain National Park went through, and it was attributed specifically to Clatworthy's autochromes.
Well, I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's I don't know. Is that in the book, Richelle?
Yeah, that is. Yeah.
Okay.
And Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes came to Estes Park
Right.
with his entourage and suggested that Clatworthy show these autochromes of the park to an already scheduled session that Congress was going to hold. And he was very instrumental in the enlargement of the park, as were other photographers with regard to the establishment of the national parks.
Right.
Clatworthy photographed the grand opening of the Rocky Mountain National Park. Just not an autochrome, but just black and white photographs.
Yeah, I hadn't colored that.
Yeah, you did. Okay, yeah.
Bobby just loved that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, I found the negative to that, when the first time I was there back, late 70s.
Good.
Was one of that I found that negative, and I found the negative to the famous photograph of John Burroughs and yeah. Well, that negative is at the museum now, the Estes Park Museum.
Good. That's a good place for it.
Yeah, it belongs there.
Bobby gave me the sign that was at their house, says Clatworthy, not that great big huge one, but the one that was on his dark room, because she wanted me to put that on I have a workshop outside, so she wanted that on there, so people would know her dad pictures were doing there too. She was just so supportive of me. And like everybody said, well, you don't have to have permission. And I said, well, I know I don't, but I feel good having permission. After 50 years, you don't have to have permission to reproduce those. But knowing that family embraces what I'm doing makes me feel so much better.
Yeah.
Boy, if I screwed one up, Bobby'd say to me, this needs a little work, Cheryl. She just would, Anyway.
Do you have note cards for sale, like in Carrie's shop and other places that are colorized Clatworthy photos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Carrie's a big supporter of Clatworthy and has been a big supporter of me and what I'm doing
as well.
Well, but Carrie was involved in helping too with the move of a lot of stuff I was involved with because of Kay. I got cleaning out that dark room and going down in that basement, and there was mice, and oh my God, it took every bit of courage, but I kept thinking, God, there might be something I need to save down here, But it was It was an experience, let's say, but it was a worthwhile experience. Good people they were.
Did you know Fred, Cheryl? Did you
No,
know Fred Jr.? No.
I didn't move out here till 50 years ago, and he was passed away by the time but I knew him through his daughter, that's for sure.
Yeah. I mean, Fred Jr., not Fred Sr.
No, I didn't know him.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. I just knew Bobby.
Just knew Bobby, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Sybil, mentioned Helen. Helen was great. I mean, she was this super outdoorsy person.
I have a picture I colored of her skiing.
Yeah, she was great. I mean, I really enjoyed Helen. She absolutely no pretense about anything. She just loved the outdoors.
Yeah. Helen was a lot like Enda Kylie. They were sort of the same, cut from the same cloth.
Really?
They loved to be outside, and they loved their famous father and wanted to continue his legacy.
That's great.
But yeah, both of them were really incredible role models. I didn't know Bobby quite as much, but it makes me happy to see people like Cheryl and Carrie. And I saw that Chris Holeen was on this, but her picture wasn't on it. Just that, we have a lot to live up to in the elder women of Estes Park.
Don't we? Don't we?
they were trailblazers, that is for sure.
Yeah.
They were trailblazers.
Oh,
Their fathers and their daughters. Yeah, Lynn.
I think you guys are doing a great job of living up to it, by the way. This is so wonderful to listen to all of you.
Thank you. Well, Bobby, I have a picture of her on top of Long's Peak. She just gave me all these pictures of herself, just thinking nobody will ever want these. Well, I did a set of women. You probably saw that card set, Sybil, of outstanding women.
Mhm.
And of course, Bobby was in there, several of them. And she says, "Oh, don't put me on there." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to do them then." Oh, okay. She was an angel. She was my angel.
One thing we probably should mention is the Clatworthys were not only important at Estes Park, they were important in Palm Springs. That's a whole nother history of the Clatworthy family.
Mark, she went out there. People went out to Palm Springs and her family didn't want her to go. It was as she was getting older, and she borrowed my suitcase because she never heard of one that had wheels. And she went out there with, I think it was the Burgess lady. And they went out there, and anyway, she drew a map. So when I went out there, because Kay's sister lives out in that area, we know right where their house was, and that mountain came down and those trails her dad built. And
yeah,
it's phenomenal.
Yeah. Clatworthy owned some 300 acres in Palm Springs at one point. He built, as you say, he built trails out there. He photographed the development of the town. I mean, I have autograms, of course, of Palm Springs, and it's, it's a house here, and it's a house like another house, half a mile away. I mean, it was just this absolutely nothing there.
Yeah.
They all went to high school there, though. Interestingly, each of the Clatworthy children graduated from Palm Springs High School.
And in a way, I think Bobby had kind of a Hollywood personality. She was kind of, I think she was used to being kind of famous through her father. And we'd have a glass of wine in the afternoon, which was, new for me. I thought she was a really neat person.
Lynn,
It's
did
funny.
You guys,
It's funny she'd
sorry,
have a
Alicia.
glass of wine because Fred's family, I mean, as you know, he was very, very active in the temperance movement. They were extremely, Fred's father was a minister in Evanston, Illinois, and that was ground zero for the temperance movement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. Speaking of Evanston, Illinois, do you know which church he was part of and where their home was in Evanston?
I don't, I mean, I have that information somewhere. But I think maybe Cheryl has a booklet that was retrieved that was put together on, I think I saw it when I was out there on Fred's father, Fred, I forgot what his name was now. Remember,
Frederick.
Oh.
do you remember Fred's father's name?
It was Frederick.
Frederick, yeah, that was Frederick Clatworthy. They put together this memorial booklet. And I thought Cheryl had, you had it. Maybe it was John, I forget who had the booklet. But yes, that information is known.
You guys, I really enjoyed that connection, Richelle, that you made with the Palm Springs part of their lives, because I first came to Estes in the mid 1960s. My parents and grandparents had been before me, but I had really close friends at that time who lived in Banning up above Palm Springs. And I used to visit them, and it was such a beautiful area and very remote, like you said at the time, Mark. And it was just such a great place to ride horses and ride bicycles. And it brought back so many good memories. I was just thrilled when I got to that part of the history of their family. It was just really enjoyable for me.
If you check some of the, I forgot which, the later issues of National Geographic, Fred did some photographs that were done in Banning.
Yes, isn't that a neat area?
Yeah, I mean, they're beautiful. These trees, it's just rows of almond trees, I believe they are.
Yes.
He did some beautiful ones of Santa Barbara too. I have a hand colored picture of Santa Barbara that
Right.
Bobby gave me that
Oh,
from way back when, and because my parents were married there, so she thought I would like.
oh,
So that was cool. She was always thoughtful.
yeah. It was really neat. I
She told me
loved
to
it.
go down Ramon Street as far as you can walk, and there's no more road. Well, the road doesn't stop anymore hardly, and that's where they lived up by that. There was some kind of not a chairlift, but some kind of a way to go up the mountain.
Yeah.
I don't know. I never found it, but I got to the end of Ramon Street. That's
Yeah, we did too. And we went to Palm Springs several times on vacation. And one of the times I went to the Palm Springs Museum there, and the curator allowed me to see what they had about Fred Clatworthy. So
neat.
yeah, and we looked for the house, where they used to live. I thought I may have identified where their house used to be.
I thought I may have too, but I'm not sure.
We don't know for sure.
All right, guys, I have one last question for us before we wrap things up. So we've talked about Mr. Clatworthy and his family in detail for sure. But so my last question is, we talked a little bit about kind of how heavy this